Early Friday morning, news broke that there had been an attack at the Pelosi San Francisco home on the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi. As the news has progressed throughout the day, we've learned more, of course, as is to be expected. But Ryan actually just tuned into the entire press conference that happened midday here on the East Coast. What did we learn, Ryan, about the attack on Paul Pelosi from that press conference?
So we learned that the weapon was a hammer. And I'll get into this in a moment. So the San Francisco police chief, William Scott, said that at 2:27 a.m., officers responded to a wellness check, which we're getting more details. We don't know if that came from maybe there was in-home surveillance technology that alerted the police. Maybe Paul was able to call from his phone, or maybe there was enough noise that a neighbor called something in. We didn't get those details from the press conference, but we do know that police got out there. When police arrived on the scene, they saw Paul Pelosi with a hammer in his hand, and the suspect, David DePape or DePappy, it's been said different ways, the 42-year-old man, also with the hammer in his hand. As soon as the police arrived, DePappy then attacked Pelosi with the hammer, Paul Pelosi with the hammer. And police, immediately intervened, but injuries were severe enough that he was taken to the hospital. Paul Pelosi, both were taken to the hospital, in fact. But Paul Pelosi was taken to the hospital, and they said he's expected to make a full recovery. When you see language like that, expected to make a full recovery, that implies that there was at one point a chance that it looked like there might not be a full recovery. A hammer, to the head, if that's where it landed, can be fatal. And the San Francisco police chief said that, in fact, DePappy is going to be charged with attempted homicide, along with a slew of other charges. Since then, there's been a kind of outpouring of support, including from Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who said he was horrified and disgusted. And I don't know if do you have his, here I have his comment right here. He said, "I'm horrified and disgusted by the reports that Paul Pelosi was assaulted in his and Speaker Pelosi's home last night. Grateful to hear that Paul is on track to make a full recovery and that law enforcement, including our stellar Capitol Police, are on the case." Nancy Pelosi was back in Washington, D.C. With her security. The Speaker has public security. Back in San Francisco, the attacker, according to reports ahead of the press conference, said, "Where is Nancy?" And told police that he was waiting for Nancy Pelosi to come home. So that's what we know as of now.
What do we know about potential political motivations other than the fact that he seemed to have been looking for Nancy Pelosi, the attacker, seemed to be looking for Nancy Pelosi? What do we know about this person? I know that there are pretty new reports about who he might be. I mean, we have his name obviously, but who he might be on a personal level, what his what his interests, motivations could be in this crime.
Right. People are immediately going to be searching through all of his social media, as has become the habit after any of these attacks or mass shootings, trying to divine what his politics might be. According to the Wall Street Journal, they wrote the suspected attacker has espoused extreme right-wing views on social media, including conspiracy theories about COVID-19, according to one of the law enforcement officials. Making sure that was the Wall Street Journal. Yes, it was. But at this point, it seems like extreme right-wing views on social media. There was this. Did you see the hot mic moment at the end of the press conference?
I didn't see that.
This is circulating on social media and is obviously just completely unverified from a reporter. But a reporter is talking to his editor on a phone while the press conference is still running, saying, "Is this the nudist guy?" It sounded like this was someone who was familiar to local reporters, and then says, "So should we look into that?" And then he answers a question from the editor. He said, and the reporter says, "Nope," but it's unclear what the question was. Question could have been, "Do you know anything more about this guy?" or something, or it could have been anyway. So there's that. It seems like we're going to learn more about him soon because it seems like the local press does have a bead on who this person is. This isn't the first. Now, this is the first violent attack on Pelosi's. If you remember back in, I think, what was it, around January 2021, her mansion, or row house mansion in San Francisco, was vandalized with, I think there was like a pig's head left out in front of it, something like that. Obviously, in 2017, Steve Scalise was shot by a former volunteer for Bernie Sanders. He survived that attack, though it appeared for a long time that he might not. In 2011, Gabby Giffords was shot by somebody with kind of deep mental health problems. It didn't seem like that you could even divine much of a political motive to that. It was shot something like 19 people at an event where Gabby Giffords was meeting constituents, killing, I think, 6 of them, and badly wounding Giffords to the point that she stepped down from Congress and is operating with significantly reduced capacity as a result of it. But this is another and ratcheting up of political violence in the country. What was your reaction when you started seeing this news circulating?
Well, and one more quick thing to add. This is NBC's Bay Area affiliate confirmed with hospital sources that Paul Pelosi is actually undergoing brain surgery. So that I think gives us more indication of the level of severity. It is interesting for that press conference that the attack didn't start until police arrived, that Paul Pelosi had the hammer in his hand. Police show up, and that's how all of this goes down. That's a very
well. They both had hammers, right?
So both of them have hammers.
Both of them had hammers,
and then
right there. And there was reporting that he had attempted to tie up Paul Pelosi so that he could wait, a hostage situation, then wait for Pelosi to come home. So just from reading between the lines of what happened, it sounds like that was his plan. His target was Nancy Pelosi. He wanted to just hold Paul Pelosi until then, but then when the police come in, he realizes he's done for, like that this is over. He's not going to get Nancy Pelosi, and at that point, he can either surrender, or he can do the sociopathic thing, which is try to kill the husband of the person that he's trying to kill. Brain surgery. Hopefully, it's just to relieve swelling from if you get hit. If you get hit in the head and your brain swells, that can cause, that can cause death itself. And so sometimes they go in there to relieve that swelling, because obviously there isn't any room for your brain to go if it needs to swell, because your skull is right there. So what they can do is relieve some of that pressure. So that sounds quite bad. That he needs this level of treatment.
And another one we actually forgot to mention in that string of sort of politically violent attacks is Rand Paul's neighbor. I've seen that kind of circulate on Twitter a bit, people reminding when that happened that Rand Paul was attacked by his neighbor, and that did happen. He also, I believe, be hospitalized. But often in these situations, it's difficult to divine or even to fit the political motivations into this sort of like neat binary box that we try to do sometimes. That may or may not turn out to be the case here. I'm in the camp that, you don't blame Bernie Sanders for what happened to Steve Scalise. And, this is on the person who did it. I think we will all agree that our political rhetoric right now is wildly overheated, but that's on both sides, and individual political actors are not responsible for the actions of often mentally ill people and just deranged, violent people who take matters into their own hands without any specific instruction to do anything of the like. That said, Ryan, I wanted to ask a question to you, which is sometimes I'm thinking specifically of the Gabby Giffords incident and the Scalise incident to some extent, but not. I don't think it was as much as with Gabby Giffords. Members return to Congress after something like this, and there's at least a fleeting moment of heightened camaraderie and a fleeting moment of sort of, we're going to put our heads together and do something. And we have to do this for the good of the country. Whether that actually, catalyzes any serious change is another question, but there's at least sort of an impulse to do it at any given moment. Do you expect to see that this time around?
Well, I don't think they have anything. Well, they certainly don't have anything legislative that they're going to do about this. They're not going to be back in Congress until after the elections, and after that, they'll be fighting over the elections. I think that the fact that both Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell have put out thoughtful statements. McCarthy reached out to Pelosi to express his sympathy and his prayers for her. Suggests that there are still bonds of humanity between the two parties. That's people may think that's a bare minimum, but you can there are certainly political systems around the world in which that doesn't exist, in which opponents are attacked or killed by supporters of the other side, and there isn't a denunciation, and sometimes even a cheering on. If you look at what's going on, say in India, in their politics right now, you're seeing it crest to a place that's so far beyond where we are now. So there is still a lot of room to go, and so perhaps this could be a wake up call, for some political leaders to stop talking about the other party in such dehumanized and existential terms. I think you can find, no doubt, you can find examples of Democrats doing it, like Joe Biden talking about semi-fascists, Hillary Clinton talking about deplorables, and maybe you feel it more from one side or another, but it does feel like the rhetoric out of places like Fox News and OAN and places like that are suggesting that that Democrats are just less than human, serpent type people, that are just a plague upon humanity. Whereas the Democratic kind of rhetoric toward Republicans is condescending, belittling, rude, but not like, but feels different in a way. On the other hand, the talk about we're going to lose our country, our democracy's going to be gone, like if these fascists take over, that does veer into more existential rhetoric. What's your sense on it?
Yeah, I don't think putting semi in front of fascist is really is doing as much work as maybe they hope it is to separate this wide swath of the country that Democrats want to classify in those severe terms. I mean, that's war language. That's language that can catalyze people to do a lot of really terrible things. And I thought the same about the former President Trump's talk about the election. It's just, this hyperbole for the sake of political expedience is really, really dangerous. And you said something super interesting about how it's not the case in other countries that you have a Kevin McCarthy equivalent reaching out to the Nancy Pelosi equivalent. And it does feel more and more like we veer into that territory as a country ourselves, which is we have had horrible moments in American history. Brooks Sumner, go back all the way to the founding of the country. It's not as though people have always been sort of holding hands and singing Kumbaya. But it does feel like in recent American history, we're getting into some dangerous territory in Washington, D.C., just in terms of the way people have these conversations and think of one another, and whether they're able. I'm not like yearning for the days of the smoke-filled back rooms, far from it, but at least being able to shake the hand of the person you're arguing with is generally important.
Yeah, that's a good point. So when Preston Brooks caned Charles Sumner in the Senate back in 1856 or whenever that was, you certainly did not have the leaders of the planter class reaching out to the leaders of the Republican Party pushing for abolition, saying we wish Sumner well. There were certainly some who extended some basic decency, but in general, there was cheering on of the attack. Famously, Preston Brooks was mailed a bunch of canes by constituents to thank him because he had broke his cane beating him. And in fact, he was censored. He resigned before they could have a vote. He then there was then a special election in his district to see who would replace him, because since he had just resigned, he ran unopposed and won. So, you're right. Like we still have a ways to fall, believe it or not. If we continue on this trajectory.
Right. And when this gets to a point that you were making, when you treat the other side as though they are literally a threat to democracy, which you can make that's a spectrum, of course, right? Like threats to democracy exist on a spectrum. And when you're talking about it, like, I don't want people to shake the hands of people who are like slaveholders. That's a pretty obvious another thing where it's like, this is a gradient. We should be able to shake hands with the people who disagree with us and work to do the business of the people. That isn't to say that you should be wonderful and kind and bend over backwards to appease and accommodate evil. But
right.
that's
and
we see the other side.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that I think we are getting to a point where you mentioned the sort of like less than human lizard people stereotype that creeps into like alt-right circles. And I mean, I haven't seen that on Fox. I think, sometimes stuff like that creeps into the mainstream, just red or blue, wherever you are. But you're right, dehumanizing or warlike language, fascism, democracy is under siege, that kind of thing. It makes ordinary people feel like they have to take dramatic action. And when you sort of get to that level, then of course you're going to see more of this.
Yeah. And I can understand the tension of the 1850s, because like you said, you don't want to compromise with evil. There were absolutely fundamental differences about the structure of the world that they lived in. One side said, this thing that you all are basing your entire economy around, where you own other people, is evil. And you look back and you see what John Brown did, and you're like, I don't think I could have done that, but I'm not going to judge him for what he tried to do. And that makes sense looking back on it. But today, Democrats and Republicans like agree on like 95% of the major questions facing the country. Like they right. disagree on like tax rates. Like if they want to fight over what books are in the public library or in the school library, like there are things that they disagree over, but they are not things that can't just be worked out. Like they're like structurally, fundamentally, they agree on pretty much everything. Like I'm sure outside of the country, watching it, people are like, what do you guys mean that you're so different, you Democrats and Republicans? We see you as mostly the same. And to go around like killing people over that, I think is absurd, and politicians, I think have a role to play in dialing that down. I mean, like, look, this is like this is not these are not existential differences here.
Yeah, it's again, like, we have the amount of blood, sweat, and tears that has gotten us to a place in this country where just about every person, and the stigma to disagree with this is rightfully very high, agrees in equal dignity, right? Like, you're not going to have the principles of, say, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the principles of it in terms of equality. There's a very high stigma in this country to disagreeing with that, because we've rightfully come so far that we believe in the equality and the dignity of people based on, regardless of where they are sexually, racially, anything like that. That in the scope of human history is a massive achievement. And in this country, it was achieved in a short period of time. That's not to say we don't have a ways to go. It is to say, though, Ryan, that on some of these existential questions, there should be more common ground. But this people who engage in this type of violence are often like deeply mentally ill, not representative of anything broader. And so that is yet to be determined in this case, and we'll see. But I am really curious if it will galvanize any sort of differences or a softening of some hearts in Congress.
Right. All societies have unwell people, and the way that they act out and the way they express that and project it, I think, is somewhat related to how unwell the overall society is. And so in that sense, in some ways, we're all responsible for everything here. Which isn't to take responsibility off of David DePape, who sounds like a deranged sociopath for attacking an old man in his home. Like, what more cowardly thing can you do? Wishing wishing Paul Pelosi, a complete and full and swift recovery.
Absolutely. And we'll keep following the story.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.